Alright, so you may remember when we did this in 2020, when we did like a million videos about the adaptations of the Stephen King short stories in their movie versions or TV versions or whatever it may be. And back then, there was actually one that I overlooked and that I kind of forgot about. There was a second one that I kind of intentionally overlooked, but we'll get to that one a little later in the month also. But these were the four books that we were talking about: Night Shift, Everything's Eventual, Skeleton Crew, and Nightmares and Dreamscapes. This one actually comes from none of these. It's Just After Sunset, which might, at least at the time of filming this, this is the only one that's been adapted to the screen from this book that I'm aware of. So I figure we'll go ahead and talk about that, since, like I said, I kind of just overlooked it when we were initially doing this. And as you can see, it comes from the Tales from the Darkside movie, which we have somewhat talked about, at least as a property, because when we did, like, Word Processor of the Gods and Sorry Right Number and stuff like that, that came from the Tales from the Darkside show, so which were also King adaptations. So, going into this one, it's interesting to look at, first of all, just the movie itself, and it's going into the horror anthology movie sort of thing, and the fact that we've been in this territory with King because we've talked about Creepshow on this channel several times, and my brother and myself talked about Creepshow 2, which had the raft in it. And what's interesting about this movie is, to my understanding, not only is it him sort of reuniting with Romero in a way, because not only did Romero direct Creepshow, but he also wrote and directed, he adapted and directed The Dark Half, the King novel, which we've also talked about. And so here, he is the one that's adapted The Cat from Hell specifically, where, like, each one was from a different writer, and it is a different adaptation of a different author and story. This one is right in the middle of the movie, and talking about Creepshow and Creepshow 2 and King's involvement in those, the fact that I think, first of all, The Cat from Hell was originally supposed to be in Creepshow 2, and that fell through for one reason or another. And then this movie came out, the Tales from the Darkside movie, and this has essentially been hailed as the actual Creepshow 3. Like, there is a Creepshow 3, but that this is like the true one, like the real Creepshow 3, and that honestly makes perfect sense to me. So, looking at it from that perspective also really brings this story to life in a great way, in a very King way. So, taking all that into account, talking about the adaptation itself and the story itself, it is interesting. We've been talking a lot about Poe this month, and this story did always kind of strike me as sort of King's, I don't know if you could say, like, ode to the Black Cat, but it's almost like it's a version of the Black Cat where King was like, now let's take that up several notches with some of the payoffs that this story has. And when you look at it as an adaptation, the first half of the segment is pretty much, it's like nearly word for word, moment by moment, exactly what's in the book. And when you look at it as far as bringing that to life, they do that in some really effective ways. There's moments where, like, even, like, the sound of the crackling fire, and, like, the way they describe, like, or how King describes when Halston's first in the room, like, everything is pretty much exactly the way you visualized it, reading it on screen. And you also have, like, the perfect casting of William Hickey as Drogon and David Johansen as Halston. Johansen especially was such a fun and interesting actor. Like, he was already, like, this really big, diverse musician with a lot of great music. And then when he kind of took onto the acting scene, he was somebody that I was always, even in, like, really shit, he was in some really, really shit movies, and he was always, regardless of the quality of the movie, somebody that I was always, like, glued to when they were on screen, from a kid to adulthood. It was such a shame when we lost him just earlier this year. And this is one thing that came to mind immediately. And when you look at the approach, like there's some changes here and there, like the appearance of the cat, where it's one of the really prominent things in the story that the cat has the two-colored face, the black and the white, where they didn't go for that in the adaptation, but I don't think... It's something that does really come through in the story in a big way, but I don't necessarily feel like much is lost, just having it be like a regular black cat in the adaptation. But it is a cool detail in the story, and kind of gives it that sort of otherworldly vibe to the cat itself. And then when we get these flashbacks, I'm kind of 2 minds about the flashbacks, because I love the way they're described in the story, and once again, that's another thing that pretty much carries over practically word for word in the adaptation, where everything sort of takes on this blue tint when we're looking back on it, and Drogon's telling us the story of how his sister was killed by the cat, and then the Alice Drummond character, who you probably remember from like Ace Ventura, and she was the librarian in Ghostbusters, and her and Gage, who's played by Mark Margolis here, with very, it's almost a dialogueless performance from Mark Margolis as Gage, which is quite funny. The Breaking Bad fans of us will know that he can convey quite a lot without dialogue, and this is another example of that. And they do some really cool things with the flashbacks, like when we're seeing the flashback and Drogon's in it, and then Drogon kind of rolls out of it, and then we see Halston there, and like the blue fades back into the regular color, stuff like that. Or when his sister falls down the stairs, and then he and Halston are talking in present day while she's still laying in a blue tint in the background. Those are all very cool ways to do the flashbacks, and I think they really work. And even like the way the dialogue carries over also over them, when he talks about like, how his mom would tell him that cats would like steal the breath of old people and babies and stuff like that. And it really brings on this eerie vibe to it, and to see it play out. The one thing I've always thought about, though, when I see these flashbacks, is how it could have been also interesting to kind of have it be all dialogue, because William Hickey was also an amazing actor, and could really, just his voice alone, and his like really rough way of speaking, despite like his small frame, was something he really put to use throughout his career. And just him sort of telling these stories to Halston without us seeing them, not only could that have been pulled off, but I would have liked sort of as far as us seeing it, like even if people don't know the story, like the ambiguity of, is this actually what's happening? Is the cat actually killing them? Basically seeing it from Halston's perspective, because Halston doesn't believe this, really, as he's hearing it, and we're seeing it play out. But I suppose you could also argue that if you're going to adapt it for the screen, then it's the movie's job to show you everything. And they do a good job of showing that in this very sort of cinematic way, and these interesting ways like we were just talking about. So that, goes either way, but I would have been really interested to see also how they played it up, that if we weren't seeing the flashbacks play out, and it was... we're seeing it from Halston's perspective, so that when the cat does do the insane shit to him, it kind of catches us off guard as to, oh man, everything Drogon said was true. With that being said, I suppose, like showing it in like a different tint is another way of saying like, there's almost something like story-like about it, to where this could be true or not true as they're showing it to us. And then when we see in its full color what happens to Halston, it kind of... So you see what I mean by I'm of 2 minds about seeing the flashbacks versus not seeing the flashbacks. Because we already got just sort of hearing the story without the visuals by reading the story. Because like I said, it's pretty close as far as the wording and the dialogue. Like hardly any of it changed going from script to screen. So there is that. And then when we reach this midway point in the story, once Drogon has left, this is where we take a drastic change from book to screen, which is, in the book, it's Halston basically reliving exactly what happened to Gage. Like, that's even what's going through his mind as the car is crashing. It's like, oh shit, what happened to Gage is exactly what's about to happen to me. And that's what happens, basically. So I do like the idea of, instead of us seeing the Gage flashback and then just Halston going through the same thing, this idea to have Drogon leave Halston in the house, and that's where the whole story happens. And it is interesting to look at it comparing the two, because you've got, in the book, you've got Halston stuck in this confined area with him, especially after they've crashed, and he's like, and the idea of this trapped feeling where for most of the time after the crash, he feels like he's pretty sure he's paralyzed. And just the descriptions of that. Those King descriptions that can make anything sound like just like unimaginable terror, and everything going on around that. But you can compare the being in a confined space and not being able to move to Halston being in one location, but it's a very unfamiliar location. So he really has no idea where the cat could be coming from or where it is at any given time. Throughout the story, he knows the cat's in the back seat, and that's it. And he can hear it. But when they're in the house, and this is an area he doesn't know, and the cat does, and seeing in like the point of view shots of him like watching Halston from wherever he is, this is all stuff that very much works cinematically also, so that's great. But I like the way they have, because there's not much Halston can do in the book when he's confined to the car, especially after it's crashed. So in this bigger environment, we can have the moments where, like, Halston becomes more and more crazed as it goes and more desperate, and as he's really coming to terms with, oh my god, this really is real, and this really is, you know, some revenge-driven cat. But also the way we see, like, his arsenal escalate. But it's almost like the more we watch his weapons get more and more out of hand, is like sort of symbolic of the more he's losing his mind as it goes. Like I said, kind of the desperation to kill it at that point is really fun. And the way he's playing that, you know, escalation and just the increasing nature of everything that's going on is perfectly chaotic and manic. Which is great. And they even bring out some of the direct lines from the book, like when he says, the rest of your lives are going in one lump sum. I think in the book he just says that like in his head, or he says it in like the narration or something. But here he's like saying it out loud as he's prepping to like hit the final piece of his arsenal as he's preparing to do this. It's a lot of fun. And so we do eventually get to his ultimate fate, which, if I remember correctly, in the book, it goes in his mouth and comes out of his stomach the next morning, I think. And of course, that's another change that we have that I kind of don't mind. It almost feels like it's more twisted, that the cat somehow comes back out the way he went in. There's something pretty insane about that, so I kind of like that addition also. And then the effect of actually seeing that. Yeah, it's like a 90s effect, you can tell it's like a dummy of David Johansen, but still. We do get some shots where you can still see like his eye. It's still him while the cat is going in. That's really wild and insane. I'll never forget the first time I saw this movie on an old VHS that I still have somewhere. And I hadn't read the story at that time, and that was shocking. That's the direction that it went in the best way. It's certainly a visual that I never forgot. It was always the one visual. There's 3 stories plus the wraparound in this movie, and whenever this movie would come up, that was always the first image in my head, was the cat going in or coming back out. And that's what I always just associated this entire movie with. And as far as what happens to Drogon, I will say that when they build up, you know, what Drogon was doing and all the dead cats with the drug and all that, he is a character that you want to see come to an end in a really big way. And I actually do think it might seem underwhelming in the story when we don't see it and we don't know what happens to him. But I love just the dreaded feeling, the dreaded nature of that line when the cat breaks out of Halston and runs into the woods in the direction that we know the house is. And just the last line of the story is like, a witness said that it was like the cat had unfinished business. And it's like, I think that kind of does the job. I think it does the job better than what we see in the movie, which is Drogon witnesses what happens to Halston and just has a heart attack. Now, maybe that's the fact that he goes out with such a whimper is, you know, a bigger insult to him. But I don't know. I really like just that sort of. I know it's almost always within a movie. It's like if it's some sort of revenge factor or a character that you want to see meet an end for a particular reason, it's the payoff is always going to be better if you actually see the thing happen. I don't know. Just in the way it's the story, it just really works to know that it's going to happen, that nobody's left except for Drogon, and whatever happens to him is so foul that King will not even tell us. Gives us the feeling enough that it was satisfying whatever it was. But I can get the appeal of him going out in such an anticlimactic fashion, like it feels intentional on the movie's part, but that's one place also where I think the ambiguity works better, I think. But, yeah, overall, it's still a really fun adaptation, and going in different directions, but going in different directions for reasons that make sense when you look at them. And as far as, like, Romero adapting, because I'm a pretty big fan of The Dark Half myself, and I love everything about Creepshow. So it's like the teaming of the two of them was always, like, you know, horror magic in a way. Maybe varying degrees of quality, but nonetheless, the magic was there in one sense or another. So I'll always appreciate these groupings of the two of them that we have. So this is where I'll end this. Like I said, we do have one more of these. We're going to go back to Night Shift, I believe, and touch on something that I kind of went around when we were doing these last. And we'll talk about that. Yeah, so we'll continue on with our horror-themed month for October. A lot of the stuff we've been talking about, VHS and Poe and all that stuff, and all the other stuff kind of sprinkled in between. And hopefully we're still having fun with this. So until the next thing, I think that's it.